Thanks for tuning in on Facebook. Thanks for tuning in on Facebook Live for Investment Insight. Round two, after we got the microphone going. So I have a lot of information today, so anything you guys want to talk about is great. A couple fun facts, because I did go a little far in my notes. Quotations fluctuate constantly, reacting often illogically to all sorts of temporary and even trivial influences. Benjamin Graham, Benjamin Graham pioneered value investing, basically about 100 years ago. And it's funny how even back then, there's fluctuations and there are today as well. Prices change when events are different from what the market expected them to be. Peter Bernstein. We talked about last Investment Insight how I thought Russia would invade Ukraine. It's gone, from the market standpoint, this Ukraine thing has gone very differently than what the market and the world pretty much thought was going to happen. I think a lot of people thought that Russia wouldn't do it because it'd be economic suicide. A lot of people thought if Russia did do it, the Ukrainians wouldn't last a week. That's not been the truth. And so when you look at the volatility of the market, almost all volatility of the market is related to uncertainty, the unknown. Not what happens, but the unknown. And the crazy part is the longer the Ukrainians hold out, the more uncertainty there will be. Now, that's a short-term loss for the market, but it could be a long-term gain for the market over time. It's worth reminding ourselves from time to time that gyrations in a stock price may tell us absolutely nothing about the prospects of the company involved. Peter Lynch, who ran the Fidelity Magellan Fund, probably the most successful mutual fund ever in the history of time. And so, it's funny, I remember when COVID hit, and FedEx stock had gone from $280 a share down to $70. Well, could you imagine, think about how idiotic that is, right? Everybody's stuck at home. You can't go outside. How are you going to get stuff? Delivery. FedEx, UPS, the Postal Service, right? So why would FedEx stock be one that drops? I can understand why Boeing would go down because people aren't flying. But I can't understand why FedEx would go down. And that just shows you one of the examples of how the market is inefficient with investing. So today, just talk about stuff, Russia, really break down Russia, Ukraine. There's really four parts to this. The first part is oil and natural gas. The second part is commodities. The third thing is global trade, and then are we going to have World War III? That's always the unknown situation. And then I don't know if we'll have enough time to get there, but the Federal Reserve is actually meeting today. So the biggest actual thing affecting your money today is not really Ukraine or Russia. It's really the Federal Reserve, which we may have time to talk about it, we may not. And then, that's where I had it started today. So if you really break down the situation with Russia and Ukraine, you have to understand how complex the global economy is. We talked about, it's like one of those things where if you look at Russia, Russia is not a capitalistic economy. You as investors can't really invest in Russia directly. Now, if you guys are familiar with BP, BP had a $20 billion markdown 2 weeks ago because they are big investors in Rosneft, Russian oil company, right? But the thing is, it's one of the things that Dudley, who ran BP's division, said, when he lived in Russia and he set that deal up, they tried to kill him multiple times. They threatened him almost every day. It's very hard doing business in Russia. My dad ran a company, international company, and they won the contract with the Russian railroad system to do the data center for the entire Russian railroad. Well, his employee in Russia, when they won the contract, they kidnapped him, they tortured him, and they murdered him and threw him in the street. Because the way the Russians have done business in the last, since the Soviet Union fell, is not a traditional American way of doing business. It's not an easy country to do business in, right? Because you win the contract, then you get murdered, right? And I remember they asked my dad to go check on the contract in Russia. What did he say? No, I'm not going. I'm not going there. You know, and so when you look at doing business in Russia, since even before Putin was in power, it is not a country that we can really invest in because it's not an open economy. You know, it's if you look at you know, even in China, it's not a fully open economy, right? These aren't countries that you know, you win based on competition. You win based on who murders the most people sometimes, you know, and that's a big thing to factor in here when we look at as investors. So if you understand that Russia is probably gonna stay a fascist regime, you know, we don't call them communists because communism, everything's owned by the people, but it's really owned by the government. In fascism, a few people own everything. Well, now it looks like Putin is now the guy that owns everything in Russia. I mean, it's very clear if you, all these sanctions, you know, I was on my honeymoon last week and we were in the Seychelles Island off the coast of Africa, and that is the number one visitors that go there are Russians. So we're at the hotel, and of course my wife's telling me to be quiet because I'm being loud about Ukraine and how bad it is. Not the smartest move maybe. But while we're there, MasterCard, Visa, and American Express decided to cancel all the credit cards for Russians. So guess what the hotel told the Russians? If you can't pay in euros today, you have to go home. So what the Russians do? They went home. And so it tells you, like, you know, here in Manchester, Tennessee, we don't see that. You don't think about, imagine though, you leave here today and your credit card doesn't work. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've moved to pretty much a cashless society for me because I don't use cash much. You know, when I used to mow lawns, all I used was cash. I used to carry $5,000 in cash in my wallet almost all the time. Okay? Today, I never carry cash. If you can ask the girls, if I need money, I'm probably going to borrow from them. Because I probably don't even have $100 in cash. But this changes how you get to look at stuff as an investor because you probably need to have some emergency cash at your house or somewhere safe. Because when you look at, they just shut down all the Russian credit cards. If they can do that to them, they can do that to you too. You know, something to factor in there as an investor. And so let's talk about oil and natural gas. So obviously the U.S. has banned Russian oil. Anybody know, why do you think we buy Russian oil to begin with?
Biden's son's company is involved in it.
Well, so Biden's son had a company in Ukraine that he was involved in, but this is different. Why do we buy Russian oil?
Because the Green New Deal, I guess.
No, that's oil, right? So I'm going to draw this again. It's going to be worse this time, probably. Maybe I'll get better. That's pretty bad. Okay, so this is roughly the United States. Maine's a little rough looking. I thought if I offended anyone from another state, I do apologize. It's really easy to draw Tennessee on a U.S. map because it's just the middle. And so most of Russian oil is called heavy crude. Now, if you guys do a little history lesson here, which I would never do, if you look at historically, where are all U.S. refineries located? Why are they there? What? Shipping. Because in the past, we thought our country was out of oil. So if we don't have oil in America, where are we going to get it from? Somewhere else. And so there's this country out there called Venezuela. You guys are familiar with Venezuela? Venezuela has the largest untapped oil reserves in the world. Okay? So a bunch of guys in Texas and Louisiana got together and said, well, hey, if we're not going to get oil from America, we're going to get it from Venezuela. And there's a country next door to Venezuela, which I can't remember off the top of my head for some reason, Ecuador, I think. They actually use American currency as their currency. Do you guys know that? They use the American dollar as their currency. They don't even have a currency. Their currency is American dollars. They also get oil from Ecuador. Actually, Ecuador was oil here too. And so, but we all know that's not what happened. Right? Venezuela ended up closing down their oil production by nationalizing their oil fields, kicking all the investors out. And then now, they actually, I think Lake Titicaca is leaking oil in their pipelines because they can't maintain it. So all the engineers that know how to build the oil refineries and oil production, where are they not in? As well. They even kicked the Chinese out. After they kicked us out, they kicked the Russians out, and the Chinese left next. So, but what's really interesting is our entire oil production in the United States is inefficient. And it's mainly inefficient because it's based on receiving oil from the coast. Whereas, most of the oil production, the new oil production in America, has been in Texas, but it's also been where else? North Dakota. Right? And Wyoming. Well, guess what they don't have there? Refineries. They don't have any way to get there. So, you know, and so when you look at oil production, this is so important to understand is the reason why we are buying Russian heavy crude is most of our oil in America is West Texas light crude. So it doesn't have to be refined as much. What product that you could buy does not require much refining? What part of oil? Do you guys know what it is? Diesel. So that's why diesel is now $1 higher. See, when I was a kid and Venezuela was open, diesel was cheaper than refined gas. But the reason why it's not is because Venezuela is not selling us the oil we need. And the only countries that have heavy crude besides Venezuela are Canada and Russia. I don't know if you guys, I'm not going to go into this investment site, but about 12 years ago, we did an investment insight, and I went over every different type of crude, because it's all different types of crude. Well, do you guys know that? So like when you're looking at crude, there's so much more into it than what you realize. For me too. And so that is why banning Russian oil, the only reason why we imported Russian oil is because they have lots of heavy crude. That's why diesel is so much more expensive now than, and that's why, if you watch the news, Venezuela released 2 American hostages this weekend that have been sitting in jail for 5 years. And the President of the United States sent his delegation to meet with the President of Venezuela because now we want Venezuela to be what? Our buddies. We want to be our friends, right? And if you notice, this morning oil prices continue to drop, and I think it's related to Iran, but I'll tell you later. But the issue with oil and the issue with energy is the reason why California energy is so expensive and is cheaper in Memphis than most places in Oklahoma is because the refineries are here, right? And California hasn't built very many refineries in the last 20 years. Do more people live in California today than 20 years ago? No. Yes, 20 years ago, yes. Last year, yes. So all these people are moving to California the last 20 years, not the last year, the last 10. And so what's happening is they haven't built more refineries. Well, if you don't have more refineries here, and all the oil's here, how does the oil get from here to California? By ship, right? So think about how stupid this is, right? Pardon my language. It's got to go on a boat to the Panama Canal and go back around. When they make the oil in North Dakota, right? And they make the oil in Wyoming. So what could they do? You build a refinery here, right? And you ship it to California. Isn't that more efficient? The problem is, as everybody knows, is our country wants to get rid of oil. We want to get rid of oil. So as investors, do you want to give your money to an oil company for 30 years when we might be off oil in 30 years? No, it's not a good investment. It's a risky investment, right? And so what's happened is U.S. banks are not loaning money to oil companies for drilling because they don't want to take the what? The risk. If you guys remember in 2014, oil hit this level, and then it what? You know. And so for the last 100 years, I don't know if you guys knew this, oil companies outperformed the S&P 500 by 0.2% a year over 100 years until 2014. And then we had this other thing called COVID. You guys ever heard that? And when COVID hit, did people drive? No, they stayed home. So what happened to gas prices? It's $1.30 a gallon. I remember I paid $1.30 a gallon in McMinnville for gas when COVID hit. Right? And so what did oil drillers not do? They didn't drill. So what's this creating? Supply issue, right? Because nobody's drilling. There's no gasoline. There's no oil. If you guys remember President Trump, when he's president, he put money into those oil companies to try to keep them drilling. But they didn't drill. They just took the money. But the thing is, and so what's happening is part of this is related to Ukraine and Russia, but part of it is a much more complex situation. It's a much more long-term problem. So, also and then you have, the whole world, right? And so because of these logistical issues, where does most of our Alaskan oil go? You guys know we make oil in Alaska. Where does it go?
Japan.
Yeah, it goes to Japan because it's closer to send it to Japan than it is to Texas. Right? And so it's interesting because, and then if you look at, so let's talk a little bit about Europe, right? Which I'm not going to try to draw Europe, because that would be a problem. I'm already a bad drawer as it is. We'll have Kimberly come do it. She's got the best handwriting in the office. She'll come do it next time. Kimberly, you want to draw Europe? Anyway. And so now you have a situation which we come to today with Ukraine and Russia. So Europe, so let's look at Russia here. So let's say you got Russia. I can draw, but I can't draw. Anyway, so we got Europe here, and we got Russia here, right? Okay. And so Russia, for the last 500 years, has considered themselves to be a European country. But they're not really Europeans. They're also Asians. Okay? But have the Chinese people been rich the last 100 years? No. Historically, have they been wealthy? Yeah. So whenever there's an energy company called Hess Oil, you guys ever heard of Hess Oil? Well, the guy that started that was Nikita Khrushchev, one of his best friends. He was what they call the favorite capitalist of communism, they said. Because what he did is he drilled a lot of oil in Russia. And so what they did is in the Soviet Union, because they owned all those countries, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, they were all part of the Kazakhstan, were all part of the Soviet Union. And so all of the oil and natural gas drilling went from Russia to Europe, because Europe had the money. The Chinese didn't have the money, so they sent it all to Europe. And so that's where you find this quagmire we're in today. And so Russia produces 10.7 million barrels of oil a day. But they only export 5 million barrels a day. Now, Russia's a very big country. If you guys weren't familiar with this, there's about as many people that are Asian that are in Russia as Europeans. Not to get racial here, but there's just as many people that look like they're Chinese and they're European in Russia. A lot of Russia is actually Chinese. It's a very multi-ethnic country. And so only 2.5 million barrels of oil a day go in to Europe from Russia. Now, China takes a lot of Russian oil. Now, if you guys have been watching the news, Russia and China continue to get closer together. There is no denying that China and Russia are becoming better friends every day. 6 months ago, Russia announced building major natural gas pipelines into China. So what we're seeing here is a long-term trend of economic development that's moving away from Europe and Russia to Russia and China. And that's going to be, unless barring Putin getting assassinated and something happening different in Russia, that's pretty much going to be the trend probably for the next 30 or 40 years, if not longer. Just the bottom line. You know, Russia has a ton of energy. They got a ton of commodities. They don't have a lot of people. China's got a lot of what? People. So it's just common sense, right? So, obviously, another thing to factor in here is oil demand. Because the economy has been so strong, oil demand globally is going up 500,000 barrels a month per day. So basically every day, at the end of the year, the world's going to use 6 million more barrels a day than they're using now. Now we talked a little bit about what happened with COVID, right? What happened with COVID? Nobody's drilling. Well, a lot of those wells that they've been drilled 2 years ago will be coming online when? Today, right? And so that's the thing when you look at oil. Now, when we look at Russia, how do you replace, so then it goes this logistical issue, right? So Russia sells 2.5 million barrels of oil a day to Russia, to Europe. If Europe says, we don't want your oil anymore, what happens?
Gotta get it somewhere else.
They gotta get somewhere else, right? Or they're gonna stop driving, right? Okay. Now we all know Russia is it warm in Russia or is it cold in Russia right now? Okay. If you guys are familiar with Russian history, Catherine the Great, every Russian czar going back 500 years ago has wanted what's called a warm water port, a way they could ship their goods and services year round. You know, we don't think about this because we don't live in Russia, right? I've been to Russia. I was in Russia in September, and it was freezing cold. Okay, in St. Petersburg, one of their warmer cities. Okay, the problem, you know, Russia has most of their ports. They have to use icebreakers for their ships to what? To sail. So if Russia stops selling oil to Europe, how do they get it anywhere else? But they can pipe it, but it's going to take a while to build it, right? They can't just do that when? They can't just be like, okay, Europe banned our oil. Oh, we got a new customer in China. They have to get it there. And that's where you're seeing this huge logistical challenge that's affecting the global economy much more than anticipated, that people think about. Is, yeah, so we don't buy Russian oil. Are they still selling their oil though? Yeah. They're just selling to what? Somebody else. But now it's inefficient. Instead of that oil coming here through, maybe through Alaska, they got to ship it down to China and find a different refinery. Or maybe they got to ship that oil. You know, one of the things is right now, if you guys didn't notice, so Finland banned all Russian planes, which you wouldn't think that's a big deal, except for Finland's really close to Russia. So they have an airplane flight right now, and you can look this up. It goes from Finland all the way around Russia to Japan, goes around Russia like this. It's added 2 hours to the flight because they can't fly over Russia. And that gives you an example of how logistics matter so much. And so now that Russia can't ship their oil here, they got to find another buyer. But if Europe was to ban their oil, they've also got to find a what? Now, is Russia closer to Europe or the United States?
Europe.
So is it cheaper for Russians to get them oil or us? Russians, right? And so whenever, you know, it's like this idea of our country. Our country has all these refineries sitting here in Texas and in Louisiana. And they should be in California, New York. They should be close to where what? Well, where the oil comes in or where you deliver it to your customer, right? I mean, because when Californians are getting their oil, their gasoline, it's having to go from North Dakota to Texas, to Panama, through Mexico, and back up, right? And imagine if you live in Seattle, right? Same concept, right? It's got to go all the way around to Seattle. When that oil is in North Dakota, it should be able to ship straight to Washington. Think about how much money it would save if you could send it straight. You know what I mean? But you do. But the only way those pipelines are built is if you all invest money in it. And if you invest money in it, what do you want to make? You want to make money, right? And that goes back, that's our big thing here with natural gas. But, okay, so that's the biggest issue with oil is demand and supply issues. You know, we've seen this since COVID hit. I mean, my whole life, we've never had shortages of stuff. We've never had shortages until COVID hit, right? Because, and the reason why we have shortages is what we're seeing today. China does not have a COVID vaccine. So how does China deal with COVID?
Lock everything down.
They shut down. They shut down Shanghai today in Shenzhen province. Both those provinces are shut down. They're back like it was for us 2 years ago. They just shut down. And when they shut down, their factories stop what? They stop working. Then they go back to work and they work 80 hours a week, and then they fill up ships and they try to what? But it's just like our country, right? If you look at, let's look at Nissan, right? Does Nissan make all of its parts here in Tennessee? They make their parts where? Everywhere. Mexico, Canada, globally, wherever. And so, the greatest example was in December. You know, those truckers, the Freedom Convoy they call them, they blocked the Canadian road into America. So General Motors had to shut down all their factories in Michigan. Now I don't know about you, but being unemployed doesn't sound like a very freedom thing to me. I'm free, I want to have money. You know, but that's those people, they're very selfish because they blocked the road, and then they also shut down those factories. And they didn't have supplies. And so when one province in China can't make stuff, I have no idea what they make in that province. But they could make some part for your car that only one place in the world makes it, right? And so that could mean that you can't get a Toyota hybrid, you know, or Toyota Highlander for the rest of the year because of that one part is in that province, right? So that is the issue. So the supply issues that we're seeing in China with COVID, now we're seeing that with energy. We're seeing that with energy for the first time because of this Ukraine war, which, you know, Russia invading Ukraine is it's basically like shooting your foot off because it hurts. You know, it's not a smart move on their part, right? Because I can tell you, you know, look, I'm on my honeymoon, and you think those Russians are happy about having to go home? Do you know how long it took me to fly there? One flight was 16 hours, and one was 6. Another one was 2. Could you imagine how happy I'd be if I just got there and they said my credit card didn't work? How are you going to get on another plane, right? I'm not carrying that much cash. And so that's what you're looking at. So that is the main issue, oil. But the real issue for the world is not oil. It's really natural gas. So if you're familiar with natural gas, most people like natural gas. Why do they like natural gas?
Clean burn.
It's clean burn. There's no carbon emission. What else did you guys say? Cheap. It's cheap and it's clean. The problem is, it's not cheap anymore. It's like everything else. You know, it's funny how things work out, like supply and demand, right? This curve always works. You know, I remember my economics professor in college. He would just ad nauseum go over the curve, and we had to calculate supply and demand curve. The curve works. It's what controls everything. It was cheap. It's now going to be what? Expensive. You know, it's just like everything else. Like, would you put all your money in one thing? Who right now wants to put all your money in Boeing stock, hoping that this is going to go good? It's not a smart move, right? So the whole world, especially Europe, especially Germany, has put their entire economic world into Russian natural gas. You guys do this. Russian BMW and Mercedes, you know, Volkswagen, they've converted all their factories from electric to what? Natural gas. Right? Now, you know, Germans are pretty smart, but this is pretty stupid. Right? And so when you look at what's going on in Europe is they've converted everything to natural gas because Russian natural gas is cheap and it's better for the environment. You know? And so we're going to hit all these goals. The problem is when you buy all your fuel from one country run by a crazy lunatic, what can happen?
Shut off.
They can shut it off. They can do whatever they want. I mean, and so this is where the issue is. So when we look at natural gas, and this is all avoidable, and our country's been telling them. When Russia invaded Syria, President Obama went to Angela Merkel, the president of Germany, and said, "You don't need to buy all your natural gas from Russia, who just used chemical weapons on people in Syria, you need to buy it from who? Us. Now, is he doing that out of the goodness of his heart, or is he doing it because, hey, I'd rather get the money, right? Now, what's interesting about it is, can we build a pipeline from Texas to Germany? Yeah. We could. Would that be a smart idea? No. I mean, everybody heard that Deepwater Horizon oil spill? Remember that old drone thing was what? 2 miles below the surface or something crazy, or 5 miles? How easy is it? I'm a big swimmer, right? You think I can swim to the bottom without holding my breath? What do you think? No. I can make it a couple hundred feet. And so when you look at oil, the only way natural gas can go to Europe is what's called LNG, liquefied natural gas. And that's where they basically turn it from a gas to a liquid, because so it can be, if you guys aren't aware of this, China agreed to expand the Panama Canal, widen it, for what reason? Liquefied natural gas, bigger ships. The only ship that needs to be that big is a LNG tanker. Now, why are they doing that? They like cheap gas. I should say that. Anyway, that's the thing. And so that is what they like. And so now here's the problem. Right now, Russian gas goes through pipelines. It actually goes through Ukraine. What's amazing to me, the Ukrainians is, the Ukrainians are shipping all this natural gas to their country that the Russians are sending into Germany. Now, I'm kind of a crazy American. If they were killing my kids and my family, what would you do to those pipelines? I'd blow the crap out of it. You know? They wouldn't get any money out of me. I'd go into other countries and start blowing them up next. They can arrest me. I wouldn't care. I had nothing to lose at that point, right? And that's exactly what I would do. Because the best way to stop somebody is to kill their money. Europeans won't do it. I'll do it for them. That's what should. But this is beyond the point. They're not really thinking it through. So, liquefied natural gas is very expensive to build a terminal. They're very expensive to build. Just to give you an example, in Cyprus, I found a source in 2015. They built a liquefied natural gas terminal in Cyprus, and it cost $6 billion. So, what do you think it costs today? Has steel gotten more expensive? What commodity hasn't gotten more expensive, right? And so, when you look at liquefied natural gas, this is the only way that Germany can find, one of the only ways they can find a partner. There is another way as well. And so, now, when they build a $10 billion liquefied natural gas terminal, if you were going to invest your life savings in that, what would you want?
Guarantee of some kind.
You want some kind of guarantee, right?
Yeah.
So Germany, when they buy that, they have to, even with Russia, they have to commit to buy so much natural gas over a what? 10-year period. 20-year period. So President Obama, when he's president, went out to the Germans and said, sign a long-term contract for natural gas, and we'll build all kinds of terminals in Louisiana and Texas, and we'll get you LNG gas. And so that is, there's, the problem is, the Germans, who basically control Europe, don't have a single liquefied natural gas terminal. Not only do they get all their gas from Russia, but we can't even send it to them if we wanted to, unless it goes through another country. You would think the logical Germans would not make an illogical decision like this, but they have made this decision. And that's where you have some options. Now, long term, we all know that this has woken Europe up. It's been good. It's probably good long term for the world. We know that solar, wind, nuclear power, and LNG are the way to go. That's what's going to happen. So, the French president, who I actually really admire, he said, before this even happened, is we're going to double the amount of nuclear power plants we have in our country. Because the best way to get it is nuclear power. It's a long-term investment, but it's a guaranteed, and it's clean energy. It's clean for pollution. And so, now, we all know that China, so what Russia is going to do is they're going to send all their natural gas that they're sending to Germany and Europe, where are they going to start sending it to? China. And Russia's going to, and then Germany, and rest of Europe's going to start buying it from who? Maybe us. There's also this country out there, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, it's called Iran. Now, they fired a missile at American servicemen this weekend. But you know who has the largest untapped natural gas reserves in the world? Iran does. Now, there's also a country called Qatar, which I was just in when I flew into Seychelles Islands. That's another island. They also sell a lot of what? Natural gas. There's also this country called Saudi Arabia. And there's this country called UAE. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with the wars in the Middle East, the Iranians are Shia. Iran's Shia Muslims. And these guys are Sunnis. And they all believe they should kill one another, to make things right. Okay? And so, it's very interesting because right now, Iran has 80 million barrels of oil to sell in the market they have in storage. So it's weird to me because the last 2 days, oil prices are dropping like crazy, and there's an Iran deal that's close by. Now, I'm not a genius. What does this tell me that's probably happened that we don't even know about? They probably made a deal. They probably think that Iranian oil is about to hit the market. Now, the average person out here in America doesn't care, right? You don't know why your gas prices go down. But you just took 80 million barrels of oil times $100, and you sold it to somebody that just fired a rocket on what? A U.S. military installation. They're going to buy more rockets? If my daughter hits me, and I say, "Oh, sweetie, it's okay, hit me again." What's she going to do? She's going to hit me again. Now, if I spank her, take her toys away, what's she going to do? She's going to think about it. She's going to think about it. And so that's the difference. And so that's what you're looking at here is, now, Iran is sitting here. Iran, through Azerbaijan and Turkey, those three countries, they could also build a pipeline into Europe. Now, we also know that Europe has had a lot of trouble with Turkey as well. But if you look at it, this is interesting. Iran and Turkey have an alliance. Do you think that's related to money? Right? Now, if I was a European, and I could get that natural gas from a place like Tennessee, because we actually have a lot of natural gas in Tennessee. We just don't have pipelines. I've got natural gas in my farm. If I was a European, I'd be like, well, maybe you could buy it from Americans, because Americans probably aren't going to shoot you. But what do you think they'll probably end up doing? Is it cheaper building a $10 billion multiple terminals, or building a pipeline from Iran into Europe? Now, you just keep doing deals with the devil, right? But we're interested to see what happens. We're interested to see how it goes. But I can tell you right now, the reason why oil prices got to be going down is something's happening with oil. All of a sudden, something's coming around. It's not hard to figure out. And so that's the biggest issue with Russia and Ukraine right now. It's the biggest issue on markets is it's very, very possible that Europe's going to go through a recession. It's very, very possible Europe goes through a recession because, look, natural gas prices have gone up. If, for some reason, let's say Russia tomorrow launches a chemical missile into Ukraine and they kill a bunch of people. What are they probably going to do in Europe? They'll retaliate. The only way they can retaliate, the only thing they have left is natural gas. Now, you shut the natural gas. Now, right now, it's warming up. It's a beautiful day here. What we can pray for is that it becomes 70 degrees in Germany. Because once it hits 70 degrees, they don't need the what? They don't need as much gas. But between now and next winter, we also can pray for 70 degrees because Ukraine actually turns into a marsh. If you guys are familiar with that part of Kiev, it's a huge marsh. So Hitler, when he invaded Ukraine, they actually got stuck in the mud. And that's one of the reasons why they lost the war. It wasn't they didn't win the war, they couldn't get there because their tanks were stuck in these marshes. And that's what you can pray for. If you want to pray for the Ukrainians, pray that ice melts, it becomes a marsh, and now the Russians have no food, no gas, and they're stuck in a swamp. they'll probably leave if they can, you know, or just whatever. And so that's the issue here for investors is, and that's the big issue with the market. That's why the market really, until this uncertainty goes away, the market can't get better. Market's not going to go up long term until they see that uncertainty be removed. Now, it'll be removed. You know, if Putin, the problem we have is, as investors, is how does Putin get a win out of this? How can Putin leave Ukraine without his ego being destroyed?
They'll get part of it.
What's that?
They'll get part of it.
They get part of Ukraine, maybe. So the thing is, that's the problem you have for the market is, what is the scenario where he can come out of this and tell his people he's a hero?
He gets that warm water port.
Yeah, he gets Constantinople. Turkey gives up their thing. I mean, if they had some, Jim, it'd be okay, but they don't have any. So, yeah, that's why, anyway, that's a long story, but Catherine the Great was the closest czar in history to taking over Constantinople. That's why they've always wanted Turkey. That's why they invaded Afghanistan. If you guys remember Afghanistan, they were trying to get to Iran, because Iran has a warm water port. That's why most Russian history is based on this concept of warm water port, which is funny because you blew up all the people we trade with. So the idea of, well, we're going to get a warm water port, but we're going to kill all the people that buy our stuff. That's stupid. So anyway, but that's the way they think. And so that's the biggest issue with markets. And that's the hard part is, but there's a very good chance that the strong economy that we've seen globally is going to get dented by this. You know, and now, right now, they're still selling all the natural gas. They're still selling all the oil. But Putin doesn't really care about money. He's already the richest man on earth. He owns the country of Russia. If you didn't know that, he has $1 billion house. He has the biggest house on earth for a person. Owned by a friend of his. Right? But the thing is, so how does he get a win? I mean, that's the thing for investors is how does he get a win so we can leave the country? Because right now, the Ukrainians aren't going to let him leave easily, right? You know, or how does he, I mean, if you go out there and try to assassinate him, that's World War III, right? You know, if somebody killed our president, would he matter? Yeah. So that's how it works. And so this is the issue with natural gas. But the good news is for investors, and the real good news long term for investors is this is going to open up new opportunities. All this money for the last 30 years has gone into Russia. Is it going to go to Russia anymore? No, it's probably going to go to places like Canada, the United States, Mexico. Mexico has tons of natural gas that's unexported. You know, this really could be a global win for the economy because the United States, Canada, and Mexico could form an energy partnership and supply the whole world. You know, you've got OPEC out there, right? Wouldn't it be better to have a friendly country, versus the unfriendly people? And so that's the issue there when it comes there. So then there's another part of this, which is commodities. So if you guys, so Russia also produces a lot of commodities. Anybody have stainless steel appliances? Or stainless steel in your house? There's this thing, you look at the doorknob over here, it's called nickel, right? You guys have noticed? I don't know if you guys saw nickel went up 500% in the last 2 weeks. Now, my refrigerator broke in December, so I ordered one in December. It's coming in June. Okay? And it's stainless steel. So what I'm already thinking in my head is what? I'm going to pay more money. Because they've not made this thing yet, they're going to have to get what? Nickel in it. So one of the biggest issues right now is commodities. Now, the biggest issue for commodities right now is a product called palladium and platinum. Now, my brother has I think he's got a platinum ring for his wedding band. So that's one of the most common uses for rings is platinum. But platinum is also used for Cadillac converters for cars. 40% of the world's total production of platinum comes from what country? Russia. So, so when you look at another impact, you already can't get a car, but they can't make Cadillac converters because of emission rules. Are they going to let you have a car without a Cadillac converter? Yeah, but you think the cops are going to hear you coming? There's a lot of people around Manchester that don't get like converters. Going down the stop sign. And so that is one big issue in the market is going to be, now they make 15% of the world's titanium. Elon Musk yesterday, the man who founded Tesla, challenged Putin to a duel for Ukraine. You guys saw that on Twitter. So he'd fight him for Ukraine. And he's a pretty colorful guy. He's actually a Russian. If you guys knew that. His family is Russian. They fled Soviet Union and they moved to South Africa. They moved from South Africa here to America. So it's interesting because he is a Rus or a Slavic person. He is a Russian in all intents and purposes. And so, challenging him to do it. But he actually buys most of his titanium from Russia, which is funny because he challenged him to duel, but I don't know if he knows where he gets his titanium from. 30% of the world's diamonds come from Russia, but it's mainly industrial diamonds. So when you're looking at cutting stuff in a factory setting, most of those diamonds come from Russia. Russia and Ukraine produce 29% of the world's wheat. I grew up in Missouri, and when I was a kid, I started digging with a shovel when my dad wasn't looking. And by the time he came back outside, I had a 3-foot hole all the way around. I had a huge moat I'd built in the backyard covered with what? Because in Missouri, it's black dirt. It's all topsoil. Here in Tennessee, we have rock and red clay. So, if my sons were like, hey, I want to go dig in the dirt, good luck. You're not going to get very far, And so that is the same thing about Ukraine. Ukraine has black dirt. It's one of the best soil places on earth. And 29% of the world's wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia. Russia's already, I think yesterday, they banned wheat export. Anybody like wheat thins? No, seriously, anybody like wheat thins? They announced yesterday they're going to have 46 less wheat thins in each bag of wheat thins. Which makes me mad because I like it cheap. The thing is, but that's the whole thing is, and so the price of wheat's gone through the roof. Now, you can grow wheat in Tennessee, but nobody thought this would happen, right? So if you knew this was going to happen, what would you do? Plant winter wheat. Because almost every farm in Tennessee that grows corn and soybeans can also grow wheat. Now, what will happen for the market is, next year, wait and see. I'm just going to tell you, if we have a good year harvest-wise, this is going to be a great year for farmers because they're going to grow corn or soybeans, and they're going to grow wheat, and they're going to be using that in those fields. We'll see more wheat planted in Manchester next year than we've ever seen in our lives. I guarantee it. Because the thing about it is, because Russia's still bombing all these ports, the Ukrainians can't get what? They can't get seed. They can't get their fertilizer. They can't get their stuff. So they're not going to be able to plant their fields. And here, right now, it's March 15th. May 1st, right? Is this going to be over May 1st? I doubt it. And so and even if it was over, once you blow up a port, can you just fix it? Is it just like, oh, hey, I know my house is gone, but I'm still living in a tent, enjoying life. That's how it is. And so that is, these commodities, and so are going up like crazy. Now, the good news is for platinum and palladium might be a problem, and wheat's a problem. But the other commodities will just float around. Instead of those commodities being sold to Europe, they're probably going to be sold out of Australia. We'll get some of those commodities out of Australia or Canada. Now, the biggest issue is, it goes back to logistics again, right? You've got this deal. This thing's coming from Russia. It's going, so most industrial diamonds go to Belgium. So what other country has a lot of diamonds besides Russia? South Africa. Now, South Africa also has some political issues right now. But is it easier? So now South African diamonds that were probably going to China will now go to Belgium. And diamonds that were going from Russia to Belgium, which is really close, are now probably going to what? China. So it's going to cost more because it's going to take longer to what? Everybody hates globalization until you lose it, right? Globalization is a really good concept because the cheapest product wins. And so what we're seeing right now is, and we've been seeing this the last 2 years, is the death of globalization. You know, in the 1970s when the Vietnam War was going on, Richard Nixon flew to flew to China, sorry. And he basically opened up China. Because the Chinese were tired of starving to death. So they wanted what? They wanted capitalism, a form of it. And now we're seeing the what? The reverse. We're seeing, if you look at this economically, we're really seeing two blocks, right? Europe, the United States, and our allies, Japan, and South Korea, Australia, and the people that are allied with Russia and China. So that's what you're seeing. Now, as an investor, what would be some areas of the market that probably do well in that situation? Where do we live at? You guys know what this town's called? What's our name of this place? This city? What do they have here? Is there something here that's a big deal? We got an Air Force base, right? Now, the F-18, you guys ever heard of that fighter jet? My dad worked on that when he was younger than me. Have they built a lot of new planes lately? What do you think they're going to be doing now? You think they're going to be building some new bombers? I mean, think about this, right? I mean, you see all these pictures of this 40-mile Russian convoy sitting there. If you're in the Air Force of the United States, what are you thinking? Oh man, it's my dream. You know, because you got 40 miles of targets. You know, that's why the Ukrainians won't play so bad, right? Because they're thinking too, you're like, oh, we don't need much. You give us 20 planes, we just, 40 miles of destruction. You know, if you guys remember Saddam Hussein, when he invaded Kuwait, all his guys were leaving. They got tired of raping and pillaging in Kuwait, and they started heading back home. What did the U.S. Air Force do? It got so bad that CNN was seeing so many Iraqis die that we backed off because we were killing too many people. Now, you think Ukrainians would do that? I doubt it. And so, if you're thinking about investing, there's a reason why Lockheed Martin stock really hadn't seen a recession or a drop this year. Because they make the F-35. What did Germany just agree to buy? Yeah, F-35s. You know, I grew up in St. Louis where they make the F-18. And Boeing, of course, was going to get an order from Germany. And now they're not going to get it. Who is? Lockheed. So Boeing stock has been getting double hit. But ultimately, now, if you were thinking about this too, if you were selling drones, the most effective weapon in this conflict has been a drone. It's not even been an Air Force jet, it's been a drone. So what would be, if you think about every war is different, right? Every tactic is different. So as investors, these investments are probably going to, because you know what, Europeans haven't been armed in about 20 years. If you're a European right now and you see what's happening in Ukraine, what do you want them to buy? I mean, if you did have a gun at your house already, think about this, right? I've got a gun at my house. The thing, I've got a few. The thing is, that's the same concept. That's what the Ukrainians, that's what everybody wants now. Because that's how it goes. Now, it's not great for the world because when you buy more guns and you buy more weapons, there's going to be what? More dead people. So someone's going to use them. But as investors, money that's going to shift around and it's going to go into these industries. There's no doubt about it. We're going to see what's going to happen. And so, ultimately, if you guys remember President Trump, when he was elected president in 2018, he did a trade war with China. And China banned all what product? You guys remember what the Chinese banned from us? Yeah, it was soybeans. Soybeans to feed their pigs. And so what was funny about it was, all of our soybeans went to Argentina, and all of Argentina's soybeans went to China. So what happened is, whenever Trump did that, the trade just moved around. Now, who here is missing any meals? Anybody eat any pork in the last couple months? The point is, it still works out, it just takes what? It just takes longer, it just takes time to figure it out. It just takes time to figure out the new situation. So what we're going to see here from the economic standpoint is, we're seeing volatility in commodities, but the market's already what? Reacting. And they're going to start making platinum in other countries. If you think somebody, people aren't looking at Russia saying, we need to get our platinum from somebody else. They're already doing that. So these things are all already in place. So by the time we hear about it, it's already happening. So that's the good news for investors. Do you have any questions about this, Russia and stuff? I know. Got more stuff. Pretty quiet. Everybody feels good. That's good news. So the next biggest thing is the Federal Reserve, which is probably the biggest market impact this year is the Federal Reserve. This year's been very interesting because now one thing I will tell you is the World War III situation. So China stock markets dropped last night. The Hong Kong stock market dropped 10% last night. Anybody know why? COVID part of it, but what's the other reason? Russia asked China for aid, and the American representative spent 7 hours with the Chinese representative yesterday in Rome, telling him that you give aid to to Russia, you're next, right? And so the issue is, when Trump did his trade war, it was the United States versus China. If China decides to go big against Ukraine, it'll be Europe, the United States, Australia, Japan, South Korea versus China. Now, obviously, that wouldn't be good for our investments because that would affect us, because there'd be another thing we got to rebalance or we got to figure out. But the thing is, ultimately, that's why their stock market went down, is because there's a fear that China will do something stupid and they'll decide to give some stuff to Russia. Now, if you guys didn't know this, the Chinese aren't saying this publicly, but it appears as though that we had their communication links tapped. Because we're basically reading what they're saying. Which that's, definitely the case. And so that's what's going on there. Which that gives you a little bit of hope for our country. We've got a pretty good defense. I can tell you this way, when the United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, it didn't look like this. We didn't have artillery cities. Okay, so the Federal Reserve is meeting today. They're going to probably raise rates a quarter of a point. You guys attend. So it's interesting because this meeting is going to be very important because everybody's trying to figure out what changes. If you guys remember, in December, the Federal Reserve said they're going to raise rates 3 times. In January, they said 7. Now we have a war in Ukraine, a war in Russia, and the thing is that causing inflation is the biggest scare for the Federal Reserve. Is inflation going up? Now, is it because of the Federal Reserve, or is it because of what? Oil. It's part of it's because of the Federal Reserve, and so the big question for today, is how is the Fed planning to react to it? And unfortunately, Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve chairperson, every time he speaks, pretty much costs us money. Now, about a week later, it sues itself out and it comes back up. But since he has been Federal Reserve chairperson for the last 4 years, he has one of the worst mouths of any Federal. He's probably the most honest Federal Reserve person we've ever had. That's the problem. Because he'll say, "I don't know," or "We'll see what," these are things that the market doesn't want to hear that, right? They want to hear what? Certainty. And so today's a very big day because they're going to raise rates, but there also is an opportunity. The Federal Reserve could say, hey, part of this inflation is temporary, related to the Ukrainian war situation, and we're going to see what happens before we overreact to it. If they say that today, the market will take that as a what? A big positive and have probably a pretty good day. If they say, we don't know what's going to go on, but we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, that would probably be the bad things to say, right? And he's had a problem in the past of saying we could, and then, and so that is, today's a big day. That's probably bigger than the Russia-Ukraine situation right now because if you look at portfolios right now, both stocks and bonds are down this year. The only investment that's really gone up this year is commodities. And so usually in a portfolio, you have so much in stocks, so much in bonds. Now bonds aren't down very much, they're down a little bit. And so the idea is when the stock market goes down, bonds what? When the stock market goes up, bonds go down. And so right now it's like this. And so that creates a unique situation because, you know, it's been a while since that's happened. And so this is why the Federal Reserve is so important today, because what he says will really affect interest rates. You know, but the thing about it is, if he raises rates a quarter point, that doesn't help us get more platinum into America. You know, because the only way to get more platinum outside of Russia is to what? Build a platinum mine somewhere else. You know, if you guys look at, there's two components to electric car, cobalt and lithium. That are very big components for electric cars. They have gone through the roof expensive. Now, cobalt comes from one country, pretty much in the world. You know what that is? It's in Africa. It's in Congo. Okay? One dictator, warlord, pretty much controls the whole cobalt supply for the world. Now, lithium is a lot of places. They actually just found cobalt in Idaho. The problem with cobalt is, you know, you have to do to mine cobalt. You got to basically blow the earth up, pollute all the water for 40 miles, and then you can make cobalt. Because it's a poison. So just imagine if you were drinking water and it was all alcohol. Yeah, you can have about 5% alcohol and be okay, but you can't have 50% alcohol. You'll die. And so that's basically what cobalt is. It's liquid poison. And so that's the problem is electric cars require cobalt and lithium. But we all know this. Do you think electric cars demand's going up? Yeah. Anytime you see gas prices go from $3 to $4, what would you start thinking as an investor? Or even as a customer? I don't want to have to worry about gas prices. Now the only problem is, as we talked earlier, is how do you power the electric cars? Because right now the only way to power it is natural gas, which comes from what country? So that's the big issue. And so that's what we're looking at for the market, is what's going on with the Reserve. The good news long term for investors is, you know, the positive is anytime there's a crisis, it does lead to a fix. You know, I mean, as investors, you could never make money in Russia. But now Russia's not going to have an economy. So other countries are going to benefit at Russia's expense. You look at Iran, right? Iran used to produce 6 million barrels of oil a day to the United States. This is back in the 70s and the 60s. Imagine if they had stayed Western, would they be producing today? Now, our country switched from Iran to Saudi Arabia when the Shah fell. But it was messy, right? It took a couple years to figure it out. But did we figure it out? Yeah, we figured it out. Saudi Arabia has produced oil in the United States. U.S. military is even in Saudi Arabia. It's totally changed things. So things will get fixed in price. But long term, as investors, this Russia crisis should open up mining in other countries. Should open up oil and natural gas drilling in America. Right? Because, you know, if I'm sitting here as an investor, and if I know how to drill oil wells, and the price of oil is $110 a barrel, what do I start thinking? I can make some money. And so they start looking at, hey, once North Dakota unfreezes, guess what's going to happen? I mean, just in 2 months, so they're going to be drilling more wells in North Dakota and Wyoming and South, you know, those areas? Yeah, it won't be cold anymore. By the way, they grow a bunch of wheat up there too. You know, so there will be people that benefit, and over time it will get better, but it takes time to sort it out. The good news is, the minute uncertainty ends, the market loves it, goes up. That's the biggest fear for the stock market and investors is uncertainty. And it could happen in a minute. It could, you know, Iran sells their oil. The uncertainty around oil goes what? Down. Russia, you know, Putin dies of a heart attack in the next 5 minutes. oh, you know, well, we don't know if it's going to replace him, but it can't be worse than him, you think? And so, you know, it just takes something to happen and the uncertainty will be gone. And that's why it's so hard as investors. It's better not to panic because you can always figure out when there's negative trend. But like when COVID hit, you guys remember the market dropped 32%, and then just like magic, literally the market went from being down 32% to being down 12% in a week. Because the market just shot up that fast in a week. And you know, it's funny, if you missed that week, you pretty much didn't make money there. And that's why it's so important, because those really good days for the market are what make it happen. You know, and so that's, look at your investments, but we'll see what happens with the Federal Reserve today. Maybe he'll talk less. I need to learn the same lesson myself. So, anyway, thanks guys for coming.